Hello, everyone. My name is Clarence Bethea, founder and CEO of Upsie, based in St. Paul, Minnesota. I am super excited to be at Twin City Startup Week with you all. So welcome. Today, I am really excited to introduce a friend and somebody that everybody in the crowd needs to know today. Frank Medrano, the head of tech and banking at JP Morgan. Welcome to the conversation, Frank.
Clarence, thank you for having us. Hope everybody's doing well and really excited to be here today.
Awesome, awesome. So, can you tell the crowd a little bit about what you do at JP Morgan?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I am an industry executive, call it a regional manager, if you will, and I oversee JP Morgan commercial banking's technology banking practice. So, basically spans kind of mid-continent. Think of Texas up to Minnesota, inclusive of Eastern Canada, as well as far as over to Pittsburgh. We work predominantly, myself and my team, including Sanjeev Shah, who some of you in the audience may know, based there in Minneapolis, work with high growth companies focused on the tech sector, as we call it, from ideation up to and through the IPO process, with the focus on our commercial banking platform, leveraging the entire breadth of the JP Morgan franchise.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to start the conversation with the Midwest. Obviously, I'm in the Midwest. A lot of people in the crowd today are from the Midwest. Let's talk about your views on the Midwest versus the coast, North, New York and SF. What are some of the great things that you are seeing about the Midwest? And then let's talk about some of the things where you think, we have an opportunity to improve upon.
Yep, no, absolutely. So, the Midwest ecosystem is, I think, ripe for opportunity. And I think the spotlight continues to shine on that region. I think that's kind of been accelerated by COVID. I think there was some momentum already in place. And so I think some of the benefits that we have there, of course, there's the cost arbitrage, right, of the Midwest versus some of the coastal markets. But just as powerful as that is the tremendous research universities that are prevalent in the Midwest, and the amount of creativity that's coming out of that. And so the partnership between academia and the partnership by some of the founders are phenomenal. And the tried and true Midwest work ethic theme, that topic comes up more often than one might believe. And so I think that there's going to be continued momentum, not only from a capital standpoint, but from a founder standpoint as well. I think we're all reading about some of the corporate reloads that are happening. Again, cost arbitrage that's occurring, and realizing that deals can get done remotely. And I think that, again, that momentum is only going to continue. It's hard to see that trend kind of coming the other way. There are some opportunities, though, because in some respects, the area is under-recognized from an investor perspective. Sometimes part of it is the humility that we find in the Midwest, which is just fine, but just the access to the markets, right? So from what we've interacted and encountered is some of the founders, and this is not unique to the Midwest, I would say this is all of the non-coastals, is thinking globally, solving a global issue and not just a Midwest issue with a certain product or solution, but rather, is this scalable in China? Is it scalable in Europe and Latin? And just thinking big. But anyway, I'll pause there.
Yeah. And so what do you think are some of the challenges when it comes to, being in the Midwest and then trying to raise from coastal firms?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think what was an issue before is not being situated and seated in the Valley, right? Which some of the coastal investor in the Valley or on the New York tri-state area, Boston. But again, I think that phenomenon is going to change. It's kind of been forced upon us to change, to kind of revisiting our mindset. The other piece of feedback that we've gathered from some of the coastal investors is the amount of tech talent relative to some of those more concentrated, dense areas. So this is where I think there's ripe opportunity for academia to double down in terms of bringing more and more of that tech talent to bear. And in a lot of cases, those are situations where is there a large enough student population with an interest in software engineering, computer science, et cetera, data science, or not. And at the same time, cross-pollinating. Maybe somebody who doesn't have the traditional tech background, but they have a wonderful idea, and suddenly you can build a team with people that are spread all over the continent, if not around the world. So I think the phenomenon of not being situated and based right there on Sand Hill Road, I think that's going to start going away. The nice thing is there's some great early stage investors that are based in the Midwest that provide that preliminary seed round, and provide some really good growth capital in some cases, guidance to help frame up and build a case for a larger round by a coastal investor down the road. So again, there continues to be so much capital flowing into this sector, if anything, again, accelerated by COVID, that I see nothing but good upside for the Midwest.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Can you talk about the unique place that JP Morgan plays in helping startups? So I know that you guys do debt. I know that you also help companies learn about equity. So can you talk a little bit about your unique position in helping startups get to the next level?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So where we're situated, at JP Morgan, household name for later stage companies, right? And some of the feedback, candidly, that we've received over the years, of course, JP Morgan is interested in Oracle and Microsoft and Apple. Yes, there is a part of the JP Morgan organization that does a tremendous amount of work there, but where we're situated, and again, as we're focused on the earlier stage companies, we leverage the same teams that cover the Oracles and the Microsofts of the world to interact with the earlier stage companies that we liaise with. There's only some 60 to 65 people that sit within this group that I'm a part of nationally. So it's a relatively flat organization. So what we do is, again, kind of leverage that same expertise. There was a wonderful IPO story there in Minneapolis, a company called Jamf that JP Morgan played a really important role in. That same team that works on that is the exact same team that we interact with and bring into companies that are still in the earlier stages of their life cycle and talk about industry trends, themes, competitive landscape, et cetera. So our ability to leverage that global banking expertise, not only from an investment banking perspective, but also from a commercial banking perspective, as far as what are some of the challenges that a company can expect when they go international. What's right around the corner? As a founder, perhaps you haven't seen that. And it's our job and our opportunity to share some of those insights. And that's where we're situated within kind of the startup ecosystem.
That's awesome. And so you bring up Jamf, and I want to talk about more particular to Minneapolis. And I think Jamf is obviously a shining light for what every startup in our community wants to become. Where do you view our community when it comes to that? Like, so we have Jamf who was next, and they went public. Do you think that we have kind of in the pipeline more companies who are coming who has potential to be a Jamf, to be a public company or a big exit? Do you think our community has that capability?
Yeah. So without breaching any confidentiality barriers, of course, I can confidently say yes. Look, there's not a monopoly on what I've gathered in doing this, for the past several years. There's not a monopoly on brightest minds in any one particular metropolitan area, but rather are there creative minds with the vision to take a company down that path. And that path is not necessarily for everyone. There's no magic to be in public that defines whether a company is successful or not. As we all know, there are many companies that have stayed private for quite some time, using growth capital, private equity, and have opted to go down that private path, or some who bootstrapped it, throughout the entirety of their life cycle. So it's not necessarily a barometer for whether it's going to be a successful company or not, because that can be kind of adjudicated a lot of different ways. But does the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area have the ingredients for that? Yes, I feel really good. And when I compare, where Minneapolis is situated and another kind of tech hub in the mid-continent area, like in Austin, if you will, you feel a lot of the same vibe. You feel a lot of the same, hey, we're in it together, versus Yes, you're always going to have very competitive landscapes, but this mindset of, again, we're in this together, let's help each other succeed. And that it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, but rather a rising tide. So we feel really good about that, and we've seen that with Jamp as well as others.
For sure. We to pat our backs a little bit in our community. We have some great programs here. Beta.mn and what they're doing for the startup community. Tech.mn, what they're doing from a journalistic standpoint to help the community. Mini demo and all the opportunities that they're offering across the landscape. Our community, we got a lot of great stuff going on. And you're right, we just don't talk about it very much,
Yeah.
and that needs to change. So I'm going to change the direction of the conversation a little bit. So right now, the fad, if you're on Twitter, everybody's talking about SPACs, right? And everybody's having a conversation about SPACs. It's the butt of all jokes on Twitter today. So first, can we start off like, what is a SPAC so that the crowd can understand what that is, and then what that means for kind of the next stage of growth companies that want to go public but don't want to deal with the IPO process?
Yep. So SPACs are an interesting animal. As you mentioned, they've kind of gotten a lot of visibility recently, and for those that have been in the finance arena for a long time can remember when they were referred to maybe as blank check corps many years ago that had a different reputation. But what we found is, again, back to so much, my comment earlier, as far as so much capital flowing into funds, there is so much that needs to be deployed. And SPACs is simply another means for a company to become public. And so basically what it is you have a SPAC sponsor that goes out and they raise some capital. Very often you have an anchor investor that's sponsoring this SPAC. And it's probably somebody that has a tremendous amount of operational expertise on one hand, aligning with somebody that has a substantial amount of capital to invest, whether that's through a fund or creating a new fund, et cetera. And then they have a window of about a couple of years to go out and buy a target. And so it's basically a SPAC is another strategic alternative for a privately held company to consider, whether it's the regular way IPO, whether it's a direct listing, or perhaps selling to a SPAC, which basically accelerates the timeline for which a company has to adhere to public company standards. So it's quite candidly as simple as that, is another potential buyer of a privately held company, that buyer being a public company already, a public shell, basically.
Right. What do you think is pushing companies to try these different SPACs and direct listings? Do you think that from a VC standpoint that companies are staying private too long, and now what happened, they pulled the value out of the companies before they got public? Or do you think it's bad unit economics and like we're just throwing money at bad companies? What do you think of the reason for these different things?
Yeah, there's a lot of different drivers. Like you mentioned, private longer, private too long, perhaps. All those are topics that kind of come into the equation around conversations on whether to pursue a SPAC or regular way IPO, et cetera. So also the question around fund sizes, as in particular, as some of the privately held companies raise 100, 500 and $500 million and larger rounds. Well, who's the next buyer? Who's going to stroke the $3 billion check? What
Right.
financial sponsor wants to do that? Well, there may or may not be some. So they're having to contemplate what the different alternatives are. The M&A market, like pretty much every other market around in late March, early April, kind of hit pause. Everybody was kind of reassessing, taking a collective deep breath. But the markets have begun to normalize in a lot of respects, and through the M&A process, SPACs is one of the alternatives there for people to consider. But I would just say that valuation timing, and there's a lot of variables. There's uncertainty around election impacts, changes in tax regimes, global trade issues, so on and so forth, where a lot of people realize, founders and investors, that is, thinking, okay, I need to be sure that I'm most up to date and current on what the implications may be under various scenarios.
It's awesome. Do you think that SPAC becomes a thing long term, or are we just seeing this because of kind of the environment that we're in today?
Oh, that's the big question. That's a good question. I just think accessing the public markets, IPO window opens and closes at various times through economic cycles. With that being one means and one method in which to access that. We think that there's some legs to this. There's some really, really good SPACs that are being formed with really, really solid sponsors behind it. And basically with them being equipped with the amount of capital that, again, it's been pretty well publicized that's gone into different funds. We think that there's some momentum for this to carry on for a good while.
Okay. So I know that you guys are, a lot that you do are later stage, because you obviously JP Morgan is huge. But I would love to spend a few minutes talking about earlier stage companies and how they can prepare themselves. I know that you guys have a program where earlier stage company could just get, just understand how to fill out like the loan paperwork and that stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Yep. No, absolutely. So a couple of different ways. So again, the group that we're in, the technology and disruptive commerce practice in JP Morgan's commercial bank, again, focused on those earlier stage companies. In many cases, these companies have raised maybe a $5-7 million round or so. So we're not talking the next Jamf, at least in the next 12 months or so. Hopefully it will be shortly thereafter, but a lot of these companies are kind of earlier stage. So what we do is we work with founders just in terms of familiarizing themselves with the various forms of capital, whether it's venture, whether it's growth equity, the various forms of debt, because there's not a one size fits all in any one of those. And in some cases, bank capital may not be the right solution. It may be some other form of financing that can be provided by a non-bank, if you will, and candidly, in some cases, it might be more flexible. It might be a temporary arrangement. So what we do is we sit down with founders, kind of walk through that process and say, look, now may not be the time, but in 12, 18, 24 months or so, you may be thinking about, a Series A or something like that. And maybe you want to think about having some type of debt facility concurrent or shortly thereafter. And so we start walking through what are some of the variables that we're looking at, what are some of the metrics that ourselves we would want to see, and perhaps others as well. And so that's something that we do. And we focus within a program that we have called Advancing Black Pathways, because we realize that there has been opportunity for improvement around access to capital and representation with founders of color, with diverse founders in every respect. And we want to be sure that we're doing our job as an organization and as individuals, quite honestly, to be sure that we're leveraging all the resources that we have in an organization like JP Morgan to help founders understand what tools and resources are available out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and let's stay on the advancing the Black Pathway program. You guys, you have put $5 million, have been committed to it. For any Black founders that's out there watching, can you talk about like maybe how they would get involved in that with you?
No, absolutely. So there are basically three primary pillars with Advancing Black Pathways, and that's basically around wealth creation, career preparation, and education. Those are three primary pillars of Advancing Black Pathways that kind of is community facing, if you will. And the way to get involved with that, I basically get in touch with your local JP Morgan Chase banker, and just start exploring topics and conversations in that regard, and understand, okay, what are some of the, how do we operationalize that, right? So it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to throw $5 million at a program. Okay, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? It means this advisory type of conversation that I'd mentioned a little bit earlier. It means to the extent that companies looking to develop a client-vendor relationship with the JP Morgan Chase, it means having access to that group as well, and saying, hey, whether it's staff augmentation, whether it's some type of IT services platform, saying, hey, I'm a diverse founder, would love to learn a little bit more about what JP Morgan Chase's view is towards this, and through the Advancing Black Pathways program is something that helps accelerate that conversation. So in short, again, get in touch with your local banker, whether it's Sanjeev, who I mentioned a little bit earlier. By all means, people, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can pick up on those conversations.
That's awesome. So can we talk about equity investing? And what does that mean to you? What does that mean to JP Morgan?
Hmm. Yep. So it's exciting. Equity for a founder, it can be a very transformational event in a company's life cycle or in a founder's life cycle. Um, and it seems like a lot of founders are in a constant state of fundraising in some cases. And sometimes outside equity, outside capital is the right answer. It is the right solution for a particular company, but the need to go out and raise capital from an outside institutional investor, again, it's not a one size fits all. Sometimes it makes sense and sometimes may not need to. We've worked with some companies that have achieved 100, 150, $200 million in top line revenue, software company, bootstrapped, two brothers
Yeah,
that started off very small. They figured out their unit economics right and right on the front end, and they scaled the business through their own personal investment and reinvesting profits, and they were able to achieve a very nice outcome on the back end for themselves without having to introduce that. And it was the right situation for them. They managed, the growth where they're able to kind of self-fund that. But for those companies that realize, hey, maybe I need a little extra boost, a little steroid shot into the growth to hire new developers to kind of boost our sales, sales team, et cetera, that's okay as well. Just be certain that as a founder, you're very familiar or working with somebody who is familiar with what the nuances are of what an equity term sheet may look like, what the right levers are. Because a multiple is not everything. As most people know, there's issues like liquidation preferences and
right.
drag along
For sure.
rights and things like that. Just be sure to not run head first into the first term sheet, to be sure that we're familiar with, again, what those nuances are. But equity investing is a big part, and interacting with equity investors is a big part of what we spend our day on, and trying to align interests, whether it be on the investor side or on the founder side, basically serve as that connective tissue.
For sure, and I think there's an opportunity. I just joined the board of Beta.mn. There's a huge opportunity to educate the earliest of stage of founder about those options. Most of the time, as an early stage founder, you get a term sheet and you're just so happy that you get it, that you are not paying attention. So I think, especially in our community, there needs to be a lot of education around that, so that founders don't make those early mistakes that a lot of people have made. So that's really awesome. Thanks for saying that. So to move the conversation, or to kind of stick with the diversity theme. So what are you seeing in the market? Like, what are investors saying? What are firms saying when it comes to the whole diversity? We obviously we had the murder of George Floyd a few months ago, and now we're in a place where everybody says go Black, right? Like that's kind of the theme across the country. And so, but what are you hearing? Like, what are you guys saying at JP Morgan about what you need to do to help that? What are you hearing from other VCs? How are people helping?
Yep. So the one thing that we're doing at JP Morgan and how we're helping around that is we're making sure that it's a sustainable effort. Proper representation, diversity and inclusion has been one of the primary tenets of JP Morgan. And I applaud our executive leadership, starting with Jamie Dimon with that. But the main thing that we want to be certain of is this is not a flash in the pan. It's not a reaction to a very horrible event. And so what we're doing is, in the conversations that we're having, whether we're having a conversation with an investor or a founder, is making sure that there is good, diverse representation in every respect. And we just feel that it's our responsibility, our personal responsibility, to make sure that that is on the table. Not to take away from the need to have a very compelling investment argument or investment profile, right? Because that is always going to be number one. But we need to be sure that that there is representation on the part of investors. That whenever we go into as a founder, and I'm sure you can appreciate and experienced it, Clarence, where you go into to make your pitch, that maybe there's somebody that kind of looks like you a little bit, may have a common experience there, that helps kind of break down some barriers, or at least creates a level of understanding. that maybe we're not all that different from one another. Maybe we have a lot more in common than we do differently. So that's one thing that we focus on, is that not only the companies that we work with as clients and potential clients, but also those investors and the suppliers and those centers of influence that we all have, to be sure that this is a topic that's important to us and will remain important to us, both on a professional as well as a personal level. And you know, just kind of circling back to the topic on a recurring basis, it's something that I do with my team. Of course, we had some conversations a couple of months ago, and we're all kind of bringing our whole selves to work. But also, guess what? We're doing it in September. I'm going to do it in November. I'm going to do it in 21, 22, and 23 and beyond. It's just who we are. And that it's a topic that's going to remain top of mind, because people like you, people like me, and others are going to be sure that it stays top of mind.
Right. Right. No, that's awesome. As a you know, Black founder in the Midwest, you know, it's really important for me to not only be vocal but be active in our community, and make sure that other Black founders are getting their opportunities. So I know a lot of people like to say like people of color, but I think we're in a time where we have to be very, very specific about who we're talking about, and I think saying Black is really important. So thank you for doing that, and thank you. It's awesome to hear that a company as large as JP Morgan is really being focused on that, right? Because I think there's been a lot of fanfare, and to hear that like you continuing to do that with your team for years to come, I think it's awesome. It speaks a lot to kind of what you stand for and what JP Morgan stand for. And so kind of getting back to the Midwest and JP Morgan, like if somebody in our community wanted to start the process with JP Morgan, whether it be early stage and learning, or they may be a VC round company and saying, you know, our next thing is either M&A and go public, like what would they need to do with you?
Sure.
I know
sure.
Sajeev is here also.
Yep. No, absolutely. So, you know, look, a lot of our conversations and our relationships begin with clients in their early stages. And it's really simple. Like any startup, they gotta make payments, right? So
right.
Very often a relationship will start off with something like that. So look, we've invested a tremendous amount in technology around real-time payments, you know, various types of payment alternatives. Ourselves, we're being disrupted by fintechs as well. So what we'll do is we'll start with an early stage company. Say, okay, look, let us put in place a banking architecture that's scalable for you. Not only where you're going to be today, but where you're going to be in 3 years and 5 years. If anything, the one thing I'm certain of is there aren't many companies that are going to outgrow a JP Morgan Chase. I feel really good about that.
Right.
Knock on wood.
Right.
And hopefully one does, and hopefully it's one of my clients. But anyway, so what you do is we just kind of start off the conversation and dialogue. In many cases, we kind of get accounts and programs set up. We have developed some product solutions for early stage companies that are kind of bundled together, you know, deeply discounted, if not free in some cases, for a period of time. And then begin the conversation around what are the milestones that a company wants to achieve. And again, is it done organically? Is it done through M&A? And then we work just kind of hand in hand through that process and bringing the right resources to the table, whether that be from our debt capital markets team, our equity capital markets team, our M&A practice, global banking, et cetera. And that's all done there on the ground in Minneapolis by Sanjeev.
Awesome. So everybody in the crowd, reach out to Sanjeev. He can help you get started. So you just said in your comment, you said something that triggered me. You know, you guys are being disrupted by fintechs, right? So that payment is a huge deal. Can we talk about some of the trends that you're seeing there? So you saw Plaid get bought by, was it MasterCard who bought Plaid? So I mean, you're seeing this whole resurgent behind payments. Phoenix, out of Austin, like you're seeing so many opportunities. How are you guys viewing those trends?
Yeah, so we have a very, very close eye on all of them, right? Which is, it's good. It makes us better. And it's the classic buy versus build exercise that we go through. In some cases, do we determine, does it make sense to buy a company like WePay, for example, which helps merchants kind of spin up an online store in minutes, whereas in the past it would take weeks for us to do that. We realized in that case, there was a 40-person team based out in Northern California. Candidly, they could do it probably better than what we could. And in that case, we went that path. In other cases, we'll develop joint venture partnerships with others. So we're keeping a close eye on the fintechs of the world and understanding where they complement what we can do. Is it best for both of us to remain separate and then develop some type of relationship in that regard, or do we kind of go ahead and tuck it in? But we think that payments. Some people will remember, last decade software was eating the world. We think this decade is that again, payments is eating software, or if anything, it's becoming more ingrained in software because of all the transactional data, the monthly recurring information that's flowing through the pipes, very similar to a payments flow. So that's something that we continue to invest in, whether it's through our own product development or through third-party partnerships where it makes sense.
Right. And outside of payments, what are some of the other interesting trends that you're seeing that you guys are keeping your eyes on?
Yeah, this Zoom, right? It's kind of the whole work from the whole work from home tidal wave that kind of hits us all, and realizing there may be some staying power to this for some period of time. So basically, the adoption of cloud capabilities, kind of network security, cyber, that has kind of grown in importance, and we're having a lot of conversations in that regard. Autonomous vehicle, and this is a little bit of a pivot over towards autonomous and electric vehicles as well. We think just kind of the leveraging and accelerated adoption of technology, and of course, kind of the systemic changes that are occurring in retail. Where companies were brick and mortar only, now they're omni-channel, and how the reemergence of certain brands through either an e-commerce only strategy, kind of what that may look like as well. So there's a lot of different components that we're looking at, a lot of different subsectors, but like any disruption that occurs in the market, we think there may be some opportunities on the backside that's coming out of this.
How long do you think we're in kind of the right now stage, right? So are we in this through 2021? Is this like some sense of normalcy that we should get used to? What is your thoughts on that?
I measure that based on how companies are transacting. We're working with a couple of companies that are affecting cross-border M&A transactions without ever having met the founders on the other side in person. It's only being done via Zoom, and all of the diligence, et cetera. So I think that this normal that we're in runs at least through the end of this year. And I think that there's going to be, some impact around, the real estate market, corporate real estate, kind of work from home. I would imagine through 21 as well, maybe not to the degree where everybody's kind of shut down working from home by mandate. I know there are gradual openings on a state-by-state basis, but it's hard to envision us going back to what we knew 6 months ago anytime soon. I know I was on a plane at least twice a week pre-COVID, and I'm not sure I'm going to be on a plane anytime soon.
Do you miss like that hustle and bustle part of it, or now are you happy with, I got time at home, Zoom?
If anything, it's more time on the clock like this, because we're not losing time going through TSA or in the air or things like that. So in some degrees, on some hand, I do miss a little bit of that, but there's nothing like human interaction, and that's the part that we miss the most. The granola bar and bottle of water for dinner from the Hudson News, I'm not sure I missed that as much.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for taking your time today. I know that you're really busy, and we appreciate you taking the time to be on this call. And I know that our community here for Twin Cities Startup, we really appreciate your time. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you to talk more about the opportunities that they could do with JP Morgan, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. Probably the best way, email me at frank.medrano, and that's MEDRANO at jpmorgan.com. And glad to have a follow-up conversation with anybody on this topic, and appreciate everybody's time. This is great.
Awesome. Well, again, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today. Twin Cities Startup Week people, thank you all for joining us, and we see you at the next session. Take care. Bye.
Thanks now.